Princess. Welcome to the World XP podcast. I think this kind of fell into my lap a little bit. You were going around trying to collect petitions so you could get on the ballot, and you happened to knock on the door. And I think we had a really good conversation that day. But why don't you just start off with a little bit of an introduction of yourself and who you are and kind of why you are relevant to this, why you wanted to run for governor.
Absolutely. Well, first I want to say I'm thankful that I knocked on your door and we were able to have, some amazing conversations. And I'm glad that I'm invited to be here today and we can go ahead and continue those conversations. So again, my name is Princess Blandon and I am running for governor here in Virginia. And my stories, it starts in a really, really bad place with tragedy. So I'll kind of start there and, kind of what led me up to where I am now. And so I'm from upstate New York. Moved here in 2004 after graduating with my bachelor's in biology from Morgan State University. And, I kind of joke around and tell people I kind of tripped and got lost out here because, again, families from New York. And while I was at school in Baltimore at Morgan State, my family came down to Middle Peninsula, Virginia to visit family. They found land, and to make a long story short, they started building houses out here. And so my mother, was able to retire young because she started working really, really young for what was Bell Atlantic at the time. And, things were getting pretty rough where we lived at in New York. And my mother, wanted to get us away, get us in a safer place to give her children a better chance. Now, I'm one of 12. On one side, so it was a lot of us, but my mother definitely, and my mother and father, did what they could to give us the best opportunities and choices possible. So started off pre-med, as a young girl, I always knew that I wanted to help our youth, and at such a tender age, I thought I knew for sure that I was going to become a pediatrician. And my time at Morgan State University definitely put the early brakes on that. So after graduation, I worked in the medical field as a patient care technician. And I remember, just kind of one day, it really, really hit me that was not for me. And so I kind of reflected back on a substitute teaching opportunity that I had in the county that I reside in. And I did pretty good with it. I really enjoyed it. And so to make a long story short, to kind of fast forward, I applied for a position as an 8th grade physical science teacher in Essex County in 2007. And surprisingly or not, I got the position, and I basically was able to hit the road running and, do very well in education. And early on, I said, this is no longer challenging to me. I feel that I can do a better job than, the administrators that, are over me. And so I earned my master's degree in K through 12 education, administration and supervision. And then I went on to earn my EDS in educational leadership. I was able to serve as a school administrator for 6 years at both the elementary and high school level. And my last year serving as an assistant principal was in 2018. My brother, Marcus David Peters, who was a high school biology teacher, he came in October to fill in for a teacher who was no longer with us. And so, my brother Marcus served as a high school biology teacher at this school that I was an assistant principal at. And on May 14, 2018, my brother completed a full day of teaching and something went to the left. My brother ended up having a mental health crisis, his very first mental health crisis. And, my brother was completely unarmed, completely undressed on a highway, when a Richmond police officer murdered my brother. I remember that day too clearly. And my first response was that, for a good while, and probably to this day, I don't feel that I ever have had an opportunity to grieve because I jumped right into fight mode because the narrative that was put out by mass media was my brother's undressed body all over the television. And the narrative was crazy naked man. And I knew that was not who my brother was. And I refused to sit silently and allow the media, to allow the city, the state of Virginia, to take my brother's lowest moment and cause that to erase all of the positive about him and allow that to define him. And so that was kind of like my spark into, fighting, for my brother, for police accountability and to get justice for my brother. that grew to me formulating a organization called Justice and Reformation. And at my brother's burial site, I had made a promise to him. And my promise was that I would not give up and that I would fight until we got justice and until we got change to ensure that a person experiencing a mental health crisis never results in a death sentence. And so since 2018, my family and I and the continuously growing supporter base, pleaded with our local and state legislators to enact legislation that calls on mental health professionals to be the first responders to a suspected or confirmed mental health crisis. We pleaded for things such as for the creation of, or to mandate that all police departments create an independent civilian review board with subpoena power to add a strong layer of police accountability when police officers misuse their power, when they use unjust excessive force. And what we got was our legislators ignoring us, from the local to the state level. It wasn't until 2020, last summer, during the Richmond uprising, that legislators, state and local legislators, reached out to me, I believe, in the hope that I would help kind of ease the tension. And they said, well, now we need a Marcus alert, bill, which is what we've been begging for since 2018. And now we need to talk about passing a bill to end qualified immunity. Now we need to have an independent CRB bill. So now I'm getting kind of bombarded by legislators in the middle of an uprising, to add police reform and criminal justice to the special session is what Governor Northam did. And they wanted to work with me to craft these bills. To make a very long story short, what I saw, reading bills for the first time, working that closely with our state legislators for the first time, what I quickly saw was that this was all very performative. They had no true desire to bring about reformative change, the changes that the people were begging and pleading for, that they were only willing to give us crumbs when we deserved the full course meal. And it was a conversation with Senator Heshmi, who carried the bill and reached out to me about working on the Independent Civilian Review Board bill. She proposed for that bill to be enabling, meaning police departments, you have the choice whether you want to hold your officers accountable or not. And I questioned her and said, why only enabling? The Democratic Party is the majority in the House, Senate, and we have a Democratic governor. You all have enough votes to be able to pass this bill to make it mandatory. And her response to me was, this is the consensus of the caucus. I said, what caucus? The Black Legislative Caucus? And she said, no, the Democratic Caucus. So for me, that was one of my last straws, because I quickly saw again that this was very performative and that our legislators had the ability to, but no true desire to put community care and safety first. And to have that, clearly shown through enacting legislation that did just that. And so my brother's murder was my spark, but the continuous failures of the two-party system, specifically the Democratic Party, is what lit a fire in me that now cannot be put out. And I, came to the conclusion early on, I remember during the uprising saying, it's time for the rise of a strong independent party. And I kept saying that, and it kind of got talked into existence, and other people started saying, yeah, and so, I'm saying that, but not really recognizing, okay, so what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And how are you going to be a part of it? And so I came to the conclusion that, a couple of things. We have to expand our fight from the streets into the seats of these key elected positions, and that we cannot continue to beg our oppressors to be our saviors, because they're not, and they will not. And so that's how I got to where I am now, which was the decision to run for governor, to ensure that across the board, from healthcare, education, environmental justice, criminal racial justice reform, labor, you name it, that we ensure that liberation is a human right, not a privilege, and that all of our legislation, all of our policy stances are built on a foundation of equity and humanity.
Yeah, that's obviously the story of your brother is a tragic one, but I'm glad that you've kind of taken that into the way that you did, instead of there. I know some people grieve and they kind of go into a hole and kind of go into a downward spiral, but you've taken it on and you're trying to make the world a better place. And I think that's very admirable. I do have, so with the third party thing, one of the things that when we were talking the other day, one of the things that came to mind that I didn't get a chance to ask you was kind of what, so you answered why you broke away from the Democratic Party, but why, were there talks about maybe teaming up with like a Libertarian Party or a Green Party or another third party? Because as you and I and most people listening know, the way that the two-party system works, it's not favorable for a third party. And so were there ever any talks for, hey, we should team up and maybe with that we would have enough to kind of take some seats or do something like that? Or kind of walk me through that process of how you got to your party.
Right. So yeah, so of course we know about other third parties, but we have not seen a third party that was, took a very fearless, stance, and position at ensuring, that again, liberation is a human right, not a privilege. To be very honest with you, one of the third parties, reached out to us as they're not running a candidate for governor, and wanted me to run, but we aligned in some things, but there were other things that we didn't necessarily align in. And again, with the Liberation Party, we are very strong, and it's going to be heard until it's clearly understood and seen in our legislation, is that no legislation should or will ever go forward as, when I am governor, about the people without the people, so that's something really important, because oftentimes, even, with other third parties, the decision is always top down. And so we're not including the voices, needs, and concerns of the impacted, oppressed people when legislation is being crafted. So yes, we knew of other third parties, but there were no third parties that were willing to, or that we saw that were have a history or actively taking a very bold, courageous, fearless, aggressive stance, at demanding, that we claim the full course meal. And again, it's from A to Z. As a veteran educator, we are still fighting, for collective bargaining. I live in Middle Peninsula. I work in Northern Virginia. It's a 3-hour minimum commute just for me to get to a place where I can do what I've gone to school for, what I love doing, and be able to make a livable wage, And again, we continuously hear, our legislators say, well, we've made progress, but we have a lot of work to do. We'll do it. We need them to say less and to do more. And so we have not found any party that we completely align with. And, Einstein's definition of insanity is to continue to do the same thing and expect different results. And oftentimes, as you were talking about, we hear people say all of the reasons why you should not support a third party candidate, and, how it can, we can split the vote. And this is my stance on that. I'm going to zoom into Virginia right now, in the upcoming gubernatorial race. Right now, there are 5 Democrats that are running for office, for the position. And come June, 5 will become 1. That's very factual mathematics. They have to, kind of go through the primary process to determine which of them will actually be the representative. For myself, who they say I don't have a shining chance, all I need is the minimum number of signatures, which at this point for this year is 2,000, and I will be a choice. So the way I look at it is that my chances are much better than at least 4 of theirs, right? But again, it's easier to, try to keep people with tradition, people playing it safe and following and supporting the status quo. When you have to get to the point where we start to become comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations and challenging, the systems that are in place. And so that's where we are right now. And if they feel that by me running, that I will split the vote and lean it towards the Republican Party, and when I say they, I mean Democrats, if that's their fear, then they can, very easy solution, get behind me and support me. And we can make sure that that does not happen.
Yeah, 100%. I think I am a third party advocate as well. I think we talked about that some the other day. And so it's coming more from just, you are in the realm of politics itself, and I'm kind of looking from the outside being like, oh, it'd be great if there was a third party. But like you said, I've heard people during the presidential election, I had people from both the Democrats and the Republicans saying, well, vote for third parties, a vote for the other side, and all this stuff. So do you have sort of, and also from the standpoint of, well, if you want to like solve the problem, then why don't you all vote for third party? I said that a little bit too, but it didn't work out too well for the presidential election. But do you have any sort of like ideas or proposals for how to combat this on a like day-to-day, like getting the votes sort of level? besides getting your name on the ballot, because I think from when we were talking, you're fairly close to getting that signature count. But once you get there, what sort of plans and ideas do you have to go forth and to win it? Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I think that, oftentimes, we know third-party candidates, we don't have the big establishment money. That's very factual as well, right? And so as I had the opportunity to meet you, what you saw was we need all boots on the ground, and that includes me as a candidate. And so I see there's so much benefit in that, because when I knocked on your door, I had no idea if you were a Republican, a Democrat, or you supported third parties. But what I did know is that I needed you to understand that as a candidate for governor, that we are fighting for humanity and equity. And so what I saw was that as I was, reaching out, and as we're knocking on doors, I've had countless people say to me, look, I'm a Republican, and I vote Republican. But after hearing me, they said, I'm going to give you a chance, So again, sometimes we stick with tradition, and it can be very oppressive, and it can be very dangerous. So again, my inability to afford, all of the voter registration that the two-party system has so they can do targeted canvassing is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to meet community members, to hear what their concerns are, what their needs are, and to also let them know that you no longer have to choose between the lesser of the two evils. So, what we have seen is that when we have the opportunity to meet people, they are normally on board after learning what we're about. So one of our big continuous goals is outreach. We must continue to be boots on the ground. If I can ever tell my story one day, I literally sometimes go from teaching, hopping in my car, to door knocking, right? Because I'm a strong believer that anything worth having is worth fighting, like, what for, and it's not going to come easy. So again, as we continue to enlighten people and let them know what we're about, and let them know that there is another option, I feel very, very strongly that we're going to continue to gain support. The other reality is this. I hear many people say, oh, I only vote during the presidential election. That has helped the establishment. That has helped the Democratic and the Republican Party, right?
Very much so.
If we're able to get a very, very high voter turnout and help people understand the importance, in their power in turning out, during this election, again, both parties have a major challenge, in front of them. And the reality is that as it stands now, things can always change. Terry McAuliffe is taking the lead in the Democratic Party, So all of those progressive supporters that are for the other two, the other 3-4 candidates, right? What are you going to do? Many of them state that they're anti-Terry McAuliffe. What are you going to do? Are you going to allow yourself to fall into the vote blue no matter who, even though that is clearly a dangerous move? Or are you going to look outside of the box and say, you know what, maybe she's not a veteran politician, but she's an impacted Virginian who will absolutely put people over profit in politics. And that's what we need. I would much rather have someone who can relate to what we're, the people who are most severely impacted and oppressed, than someone who is making decisions out of privilege that has no connection with what's really going on in our most marginalized communities, that the struggles of our working class community members.
Definitely. I think even for me personally, I was planning on voting for the governor election, but I hadn't really done much research or thought into it. I have a vested interest in this now, based on exactly based on what you said. And even if we don't agree on everything, being able to hear and ask you questions, and kind of, this is not sort of the access that you would get to somebody running for a spot like governor or senate or anything. This is not something that you would get ever really. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity as well. But I want to move on a little bit so I went on the Liberation Party website and was kind of going down some of the policy issues and thinking of some of the questions. And this one is not so much, not that I don't have an opinion on this, but as far as the LGBTQIA plus rights, I was at a brewery last weekend or the weekend before, and the bathrooms they had were just like individual rooms, and they said sit or stand on the door, and there was like 4 of each, and I was like, that's brilliant, problem solved. right there.
Right. I think that, as, people are feeling more comfortable coming out, to even include myself, as that has just happened, within the last, year. A lot of, we see that there are more people that are a part of this community, than we initially thought, as we continue to feel, safe with it. But, as a school administrator and as a current teacher, I have some students, that made it clear, and they're open, and I love it that they feel safe enough to let us know as adults, and we accommodate them, at least in the school that I'm working for. We accommodate them, we do it in a way that's not degrading to them, that's not bringing a lot of attention. And I think that that's a brilliant way to do it. We need to respect people and their choices. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier, humanity, regardless as to our identity, how we identify ourselves, or our sexual preference. We're all humans, and we don't, people, who may identify themselves in a way that you or someone else may not agree with, that does not mean they should be dehumanized. It does not mean that they should be disrespected, and a spectacle should be made of them. So I applaud whatever that establishment is that you visited that did that. There was a big case in Gloucester County, which is a little south of us, with a student, and I think it might have recently settled out of court, but it was in court, for a while, and again, a lot of it, sometimes we have people who are just stuck in their ways. Sometimes tradition can be very dangerous. Sometimes religion can be very dangerous as well, and we take our own belief system and ideologies and we impose it on other people, right? And so it's really important that we get to the point where we say, okay, maybe I personally don't agree, right? But I respect your decision. I respect your choice. And I think I may have said this statement to you before, and it's regarding the LGBTQIA plus community. Is regarding differences in ethnicities. When one subgroup's right to exist is treated and perceived as a threat to the existence of someone else, we're going to continuously have friction. We're going to continuously, be at war, because again, it's as if one subgroup has to be inferior to the other, and it should not be that way. And so again, we go circle right back around to what? Equity and humanity.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with that. I think that's kind of how I live. I have my own beliefs and morals, and that's how I act in the world, out in the world, and do what I perceive is the right thing. And as long as you or whoever kind of acts accordingly and doesn't impose what they want to do on me, we're not going to have a problem. And that's kind of how I live my life. And I think a lot of people, there are definitely people who don't view it that way, but I think there's a lot more people out there than we think, or that CNN or Fox would have us believe, that exists in that way. You did mention another term, though, that was equity. And just for the sake of the rest of the podcast, do you care to kind of define what you mean by both equity and I'm sure the term progressive as well will pop up in the conversation? Do you care to sort of define those? Because I know there's lots of different definitions that are around there. And just for the sake of, for those listening, just so they know what you mean when you use those terms.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about equity, where, and when I go on to define this, I do want to use the word equality as well, because I think that that needs to be differentiated. Those two terms should be differentiated between, as oftentimes there's confusion. And so when we look at equality, I think of that as, okay, well, everyone has access to the same things, right? Everyone has, we make sure that everyone, that there's a school and everyone can walk through that school door. Let's take a community college, right? It's open for anyone to attend a community college, right? However, when we think of equity, we need to talk about ensuring that the variables, that the resources, that all of the components are in place to make sure that everyone can walk through that door, right? So we can say that, well, everyone can go to a community college, but if we have, person A whose family has money, if you have person A who has money and they're able to attend, and then you have person B who wants to attend, right? They physically can walk into that building, but they're not able to register for classes because they do not have the financial means to, then we do not have equity. So making sure that everyone has the ability to access the same things.
And then what about progressive?
Absolutely. So when I say progressive, when I think of progressive, excuse me, I think of fearless. I think of actions which are moving us forward, not keeping us running in the same place, not pushing us back. And so a lot of times when we say we need fearless progressive leaders, we need leaders who are ready and willing to take the needed steps to move us forward, to ensure that we are making progress towards a given set or given set of goals or given goal.
Gotcha. Perfect. Another thing I noticed on the website, as far as gun ownership, I saw there was one bullet that said the goal is to advance inclusive and safe gun ownership, and then maybe a few bullets later, the term levying anti-gun legislation was used. So I was just curious as to what your sort of your stance on gun ownership, gun control, gun rights, etc. What sort of is your stance on that?
Right. So it's very interesting because a lot has changed for me just on a very personal level. But I am very supportive of the right to bear arms. I know that, for me, looking at it on a very personal level, this summer, after the unjust murder of George Floyd, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of Black and brown people, our fear levels started to go up. When we saw what happened, the terrorist attack, attempted terrorist attack, on the Capitol, and we saw the lack of accountability, for it, as we continue to see even post my brother's murder, even post the unjust murder of George Floyd, when we see no police accountability, which equates to and results in police officers, in my opinion, feeling empowered to continue to, take the lives of individuals unjustly. When we see community members, that are so quick to act aggressively, whether it's verbally or physically towards Black and brown community members. And again, there's no accountability. When we hear of gun shops, during that time, selling out, of their guns, and a lot of us, are like, okay, we're not buying them, so where are they going? It brought this upcoming summer a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, for a lot of people. And I believe that, every Virginian, every individual should have the right to bear arms. I do believe that we need to regulate, to a certain degree, the grade of firearms that's being, obtained. And I also, couldn't talk about firearms without talking about, we hear a lot of legislators talk about crime, within some of our communities. And a lot of times they go for, we need to, enact legislation that does not enable individuals to obtain or so easily obtain firearms. And I'm from New York. Let me just say that again. And what I will say is that, to me, enacting more legislation regarding firearms is kind of like a restraining order. A person that truly has motives, to cause harm, we think of domestic violence, is like a person who truly has motives to obtain a gun. If they really want to, they can. Throwing a piece of paper and saying, but it's the law, or I have a restraining order, isn't going to stop it. A person who, we can't wipe out, there's no legislation that will be able to remove all, personally owned guns, whether it's registered or not registered. There's something called the black market. So we have to start getting to the why variable. And that's something I don't hear any legislators talk about. When we talk about the crimes within our communities, last month I went to a vigil of a young lady, Miss Hill, and her 3-month-old, who were murdered. They were killed by a community member. Again, it's not just the person needs to be held accountable, but we must start taking more proactive approaches and get into the why variables that some of these, acts of violence and gun crimes are happening in the first place. Again, we cannot remove all guns. That's not realistic. We cannot 100% prevent guns from getting into the wrong hands. But what we can do is take proactive approaches, help people to address their mental health, situations that may put them at a higher likelihood to commit some of these acts. What we can do is address the continuous generational poverty in some of our communities that keep a lot of our community members in survival mode. So, again, I support people being able to legally bear arms. I do not support people having some of these high military grade, firearms, as I personally do not see how, why, or where that is appropriate. As an educator, I have seen too many times news headlines of individuals coming into school, with firearms, that are high grade and taking many lives. And so, that's where I stand at it as far as legislation is concerned and personally.
Yeah, I really like that answer. I think most of the time when you hear politicians talk about it, it's either all the way one way, you can have whatever gun you want, or all the way the other way, like you're not going to be able to buy a gun unless you're an angel type deal. So I really appreciate the perspective of kind of like one side is kind of right and the other side is also kind of right, and that at some point we have to use our brains and realize that the black market exists, and if somebody really wants one, then they'll probably be able to get one. One of the other things that you mentioned was the why variable, and I think part of that definitely would be the education part, and making sure people have access to good education. I think one of the things that you mentioned on the website and that you mentioned the other day was you wanted to make sure that public schools have more funding, and I don't recall exactly how they get their funding currently, but one of the other things you mentioned was on the website was that you would reallocate private school subsidies to public schools. And so I was just kind of curious as to how, given that different public schools have different funding, like the ones up in Northern Virginia have much more funding than the ones out in like Middle Peninsula or maybe inner city Richmond or something like that. What are your ideas and what are your proposals to kind of balance out those discrepancies and then make sure that we get those schools that maybe don't have as much resources as the other ones up to where those like those top flight schools are in Northern Virginia?
Right. Yeah. And I think that this is where we go back into that conversation of equity, right? Because we can say everyone has access, every student has access to go to schools, right? However, the amount of funding, that is allocated, to our schools is very heavily dependent on the taxpayers, So if you live in an area where there's a high unemployment, rate, and we don't have many homeowners who are paying, these personal property taxes and so on, then there's going to very naturally be there's a smaller pot of funds, that will be able to go, to that school. And so, instead of us funding our schools, based off of, taxpayers, the amount of funds from taxpayers, we need to start funding our schools based off of needs, schools are one of the first areas that we do cuts, teachers, I remember, I believe it was last year or so, hearing that, the governor said that we were going to get a raise, and then the pandemic hit and it was like, okay, no raise, no steps from the school, so it's like there's a high demand on what the teachers are required to do, but we don't have enough funding for the proper resources. We don't have enough funding to ensure that the child who lives in a very impoverished community has access to the same quality, resources, and even the same state of the art, buildings. I've gone in some buildings that look like a juvenile detention, and then you go in other ones and you're like, wow, is this a school? Right. So we need to make sure that our schools are fully funded with all of the resources that they need to be able to have access to the same opportunities. And, again, as a veteran educator, I've seen it, where I worked at initially was in very rural Virginia. I worked in a Title I school. So, again, when we talk Title I, we're talking about the amount of, we look at variables such as the amount of students who receive free or reduced lunch, and it was well over 75. I believe at the school that I'm at now, it's in the 80s, but again, you can go look at the public school that I work now and then go look at one of our private schools, and it's night and day. Even as far as our teachers are concerned, when we look into some of our private schools, we don't even have, we're not even fully staffed. with highly qualified teachers. Each year that I've been at my current school, we have long-term substitutes there. So when we talk about fully funding education, we can't do that without drawing in more qualified teachers into education, because right now there's a mass exodus, right? And that's going to have a major adverse impact on our schools, very heavily on our public schools.
So I have three sort of thoughts that came out of that. And the first was, so you mentioned, I think early, and I think maybe you misspoke, but you said you didn't want to fund it by taxes, but I assume you meant the personal property taxes.
You said, I said what?
I think you said something along the lines of you didn't want to fund schools by taxpayer money, but I think you meant specifically the personal property.
No, I wasn't saying not to. What I was saying is that in the area that we have a smaller pool, because we have less taxpayers. We have less a lower quantity of homeowners. Then we have less money. So I'm not saying not to, but what we see is a major difference in the area where we have a lot of people who are able to pay taxes. So there's a divide just on that. So for example, I worked in Essex County. I lived in Middlesex County. It's slightly different. Like the schools down here are not Title I. We have a much lower poverty level, right? You see that there's the schools look much better, than some of our schools there in Essex County, where there's a much higher poverty level. So there's less money that are local money that's going into our schools. So I'm not saying not to, but it should not be you only get money based off of your local pool. And then an area that has a greater pool, because you have more taxpayers, then they very organically end up with more money. What we should be doing is looking at, pooling the money together and distributing it based off of what do the schools need.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was just clarifying that. I was pretty sure I understood, but just wanted to double check that I understood correctly. And then the other thing was, as far as the private schools go, and maybe this is my lack of understanding on how private schools work in terms of like a business sense or a private entity, but what sort of subsidies do they get that you maybe would look to change, or sort of how do you propose to get these schools like the extra, so aside from pooling it, and then like I'm trying to phrase this correctly, how would you decide what needs I guess would quantify, like this school gets X number of dollars versus that school gets Y number of dollars, but there's this private school over here that's kind of its own thing, so what do they get? Like, how would you sort of go about deciding and like sorting through all that? I hope I worded that kind of correctly, kind of stumbled through that a little bit, but hopefully that made sense.
Well, I hope I'm going to try. I hope that I'm going to answer it according to what your question is. And so, we believe very strongly that we need to reallocate funds that we are currently given to our private schools to invest in our public schools. I think that in addition to reallocating funds that go towards our private school into our public schools, is that something else that, I speak very openly about, definitely not popular out there, is that we need to reallocate funds from our police departments as well to put those into systems of community care and to reinvest it into, our educational system as well. And so, we continuously see that our police departments are getting more funding, they're getting more training. However, we see a major imbalance as far as the relationship, between police in various communities and the results of what we're getting. And so, for example, we send our police officers out to answer mental health calls. As a school administrator, when I have students within the building and they're having a mental health crisis, we are required to call the police and escort them out. So instead of giving our police the large quantity of money that we put in them, reallocate those funds to systems of care, reallocate it to ensure that we have school counselors, in our school, that we have mental health counselors in our schools and not police officers in our schools. So I think that, and as governor, we need to do a major needs assessment and analysis of our state budgets and make sure that we are diverting our money or, into systems of care. Again, I know for sure that a lot of funding, I'm using the police department as one example, could definitely be better reallocated. And when we look at our private schools as well, to me, when I think about our private schools, is we can't talk about them without talking about kind of their origins, and their origins were to help not, their origins were to push against ending segregation, and when we talk about that, we have to look at, who predominantly has access to go into these private schools. It's not people that look like me and my children, right? And so again, it pushes the agenda, of segregation, and it definitely does not push equity. We're going to have private schools, and we need to ensure that everyone has access to those private schools. And if we, have those, and saying that, if we make sure that everyone has access to those private schools, then doesn't it just make sense to make sure that all of our schools are fully funded so they all have access to the same thing?
Yeah, no, it does. And that was the next question I had, actually. It was one of the things on your website as well, said you were advocating for kind of choice and flexibility and how students would get to learn and where they would get to go to school. And so the question was kind of going to be why would you need that flexibility if they were all at the same sort of level?
Right. And I think I want to bring some clarity about what what we mean by school choice, because it's not just the location, where you go to school, but even within the same school building. I'm going to use my own daughter as an example. I'm not sure if I told you, my oldest daughter graduated 14 years old with her associate's degree, then graduated from high school a month later, went on to earn her bachelor's degree at the age of 17, and now she's finishing up her bachelor's degree. So she's finishing up her master's degree. It took a lot of fighting with the school system just to get them to allow her to follow the track that she was able to move on, and at the pace that she was able to move. Our school system has a very one-track system, and even though we use words such as differentiation, it still forces all students to follow the same path, and we must get to the point where we start teaching our kids that there's more than one way to get to the same end goal, right? And that we all don't have to jog at the same pace, and we don't all have to jog on the same path. Ron Clark in Atlanta has an amazing school, where, they have something very symbolic. They have a staircase and they have a slide. Again, it shows that you can reach the same ending point going different paths. And so when we talk about school choice, I think the pandemic has shown us that we are able to do things differently, right? So some students, it has worked very well for, especially if it was a student that for whatever reason, maybe was an introvert, or, maybe had peer relations with other students, they were able to, function very well. Then we have other students who didn't, I have a daughter who has an IEP, so she receives special education services, and she has been struggling. It has been a struggle for her, right? But if we allow, students and families options, for example, virtual versus, physically in the building, right? If we have a child who is able to excel at a faster pace, why slow them down, for things such as, but he or she needs those social skills, right? That's when we start seeing behavioral issues, because we have a child who is really advanced and we're not challenging them enough. And we're saying you have to fit into this same mold, right? Can we start doing a better job with ensuring that we provide the whole buffet for students, and not just gear them towards being college bound, but help those that may need trade schools? And I think that if we start opening up more choices, we're going to also decrease our dropout rate as well. Because when we try to push everyone through that same lane, we're going to have some students who clearly see early on that this is just not for me. As a high school administrator, where we had to, definitely keep an eye on our graduation rate just for accreditation, I had some of my babies that came to me and they're like, Ms. Glenn, I can't. Like, I just can't, whether it's variables at home, I got to take care of house, I got to work, Ms. Blandy, because my parents aren't doing it, or my parents are dealing with X, Y, and Z. We need to flex more. We need to definitely exercise more flexibility and more choices. And again, I see very clearly that the pandemic has forced us to see that we can do that. And I'm happy to say that some schools are moving forward with saying, okay, we're going to offer options next year, for those students who want to do things virtually, we will offer options. And that cohort of students that would do it were really small. My daughter was a part of a very small group of students. And oftentimes those were students whose parents, were educators, such as myself. So we kind of knew how the system worked and that we didn't really have to go the traditional way, or there's students whose parents have a decent amount of money, and they have connections, with people. So I'm very happy to see that schools, kind of as we're transitioning and hopefully moving out of the pandemic, are saying, you know what, we're forced to function in different ways, and now we're going to go ahead and continue to expand our buffet of options that we put forward for families.
Yeah, definitely. I think we spoke about this as well, that I was kind of a little bit of a victim of that one track thing as well. I skipped first grade and was doing really well up until probably like middle schoolish, and then got kind of bored and just ended up coasting through the rest of school. And maybe if there was some more flexibility, could have done some different things. But I mean,
Some
that's,
amazing things.
yeah, that's in the past. But yeah, like you said, is the flexibility, I think, is really important. I know, like, I have younger siblings that kind of were similar. They got bored and kind of caused different sorts of problems, behavioral problems, like you mentioned. They weren't so bad, but we won't tell them that. But yeah, in order to get that flexibility, one of the things you would need is more funding. And I think teachers and education in general is probably one of the most undervalued things that we have right now, monetarily anyways, in our society. And for me personally, that having close friends who are teachers and relatives who are teachers, I think that's definitely one of the things that needs to be addressed. So I'm definitely happy to see that you're taking a stance on that, and hopefully when you win.
Thank you. Let's continue to
Yeah,
claim it.
when you win, we'll be able to see some changes in that for the better.
Absolutely.
One of the, so kind of going down your website a little bit more, healthcare, I saw, and this is more just this question is not really mine, but more of I've seen it tossed around, and not just in terms of healthcare, but in all sort of industries in general, about the for-profit nature of different things. And I often hear people say, well, how would you innovate then? Like the United States, yeah, we have to pay more for certain things, but we developed the COVID vaccines, and we have like people come here for the top end surgeries that maybe are new or cutting edge or that sort of thing. What is your sort of response to that claim or question, and what is your sort of plan to address getting healthcare to those who need it whilst continuing to be able to innovate?
Absolutely. Healthcare, it's something that I, on a very firsthand level, have dealt with. My dad has been a diabetic since he was about 11, 13 years old. And just kind of fast forward now, he's in his mid 50s, and he is in a hospital very frequently. And I've been told very directly that he wouldn't make it many times. In his 50s, he's reliant on having dialysis. He's had triple bypass surgery multiple times. And, I remember being here and, him being upstate at the hospital in New York. And, the doctor saying, look, we're not able, it's too much of a risk, to open things up, or try to open things up, only a small fraction of his heart is functioning properly. And my dad's been dropped from health insurance. It's been hard to get things like life insurance because of something that he had no control over. And I remember his just fear a couple of times that, little Princess, I can't go to the hospital, to the doctors, because I don't have health insurance. We're kind of in that limbo fighting with, the insurance company. And my dad is very medically fragile. And so essentially what we say is that for the haves, you deserve to live. You deserve to get the top quality, healthcare services. And for those who can't afford it, that your life isn't worth it, And again, with us, we put humanity and equity at the center of all of our policy stances. And we believe that access to health insurance is a human right, not a privilege. Certain things, and I believe I said it to you, health insurance, healthy foods, housing, that's at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. So as governor, it's not, we don't just say affordable healthcare. We need to ensure healthcare for all. And I understand that it's easier said than done, but what I do know is that we're able to do what we put our minds to. We're able to do what it is that we want to do. I've seen countless times we just happen to find money from out of nowhere. For example, in Richmond over the summer, and I hope I'm not quoting the amount, but it was between $3 to $6 million that the mayor said he stumbled upon in surplus you don't just stumble upon that amount of money because it was never lost in the first place, right? So where there is a true will, there is a way. And when we have legislators, not to just include the governor, but when we have legislators that put humanity over profit, then anything is possible. Just the cost of insulin alone, like we have community members that cannot afford the insulin. Again, when we make it so that that access to certain vital, medications and healthcare services are dependent on your ability to pay, then we're putting profit over humanity. We're putting profit over people. And so as governor, we will comb through our budgets and we will do everything in our power to ensure that all Virginians are, have healthcare insurance. Because again, that is at the very bottom of Bloom's taxonomy in order for us all to be able to survive. And again, the pharmaceutical business, the healthcare, it is a big money making business, that is at the expense of so many lives that just can't afford it. And it does not mean that their lives, that our lives, because I fall in that category as well. It does not mean that I should not have the right to have access to the ability to live, that I should not be able to get dialysis, that I should not be able to, get the best healthcare possible to help with a given illness. And so that's something that's really important to myself, to our campaign, to the Liberation Party, is ensuring that things such as healthcare, ensuring things such as housing, healthy access to healthy foods, right? Because that's a preventative measure. In many cases, if we can help people to have access to healthy foods, then that's a preventative measure, and something that we believe very heavily on is in taking proactive approaches. Some things we can be very proactive, about, such as healthcare, or such as, different illnesses. In some cases, if we can ensure that people, have access to some healthy foods, then they can help reduce the dependence or need to seek certain healthcare.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think for me, it's a struggle to find the balance between the innovation and the top end stuff, like you were saying, whilst also making sure that everybody else is not sort of left in the dust. Because I think, and I think you would agree with this as well, but the innovation and the kind of the money that people put in as an investment does bring, I would say, some positives in terms of like the COVID vaccines and some of the other stuff. And so for me, it's just kind of a how do you balance that? So have you given any thought to kind of that sort of balance, or where are you with that in terms of a like a, not necessarily policy, but how do you allow for that to continue while bringing along everybody else?
Right. So, again, unfortunately, we live in a world, we live in a society that is very money hungry, right? So, as a teacher, I was just teaching my students, we learned about, water quality and watersheds. And I had showed them this video and we had talked about, Flint, Michigan, and the lead in the water. And, they said, but isn't the government like supposed to protect people from stuff like this, right? So it's like there's certain things that our government has the ability to address and to prevent. But again, we have to look at the people who are being most directly or adversely impacted. We look at, in Flint, it was the Black communities, mostly Black communities, that caused mothers who were pregnant to have babies with birth defects. We hear about in some of our, and I know this isn't here in Virginia nor the United States, but when we talk about, the cost, of some of the innovations, as we were watching the video, we were talking about water quality, and I believe it was in Mexico. And there was a mother who was talking about how she lost some of her babies simply due to diarrhea and not being able to afford an antibiotic. They are very inexpensive, right? The raw value of some of the medications are very inexpensive. So we must look at how much profit is being made, for some of these medical services and for some of the medications.
So would you say maybe like a price cap, or would you do some sort of maybe an audit and to see kind of what percentage of profits they're making, or maybe you would say something along the lines of, and I'm just throwing things out here. I have no idea whether or not these would actually work, but maybe some sort of, okay, we will throw you a tax break if you cap the price at whatever.
Right.
Are you looking at sort of things along those lines? Is
Right.
that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, I think that we definitely need to put some caps, in place. We absolutely do need to put some caps in place. But I am a very strong believer, and I know I said this earlier. As governor, it will not be a princess decision. I believe in bringing people to the table. Let's bring in stakeholders to the table. Let's bring in people who are impacted, by the very, very high cost of of some of our medical services and medications to the table. Right before I got on this call, I was on the stakeholders call for for the Marcus Alert bill, and I was giving them feedback, and some of my questions they kind of ignored. But again, we can't keep pushing legislation forward about people who are impacted without making sure that we're elevating and including their feedback and their concerns. So, and that's important, because when we talk about equity, and I think you and I talked about this a little bit, what someone was, and when we look at equity and equality, someone may say, okay, well, we want to make sure that we provide equal housing opportunities for everyone. That's the thing, isn't it? Right? Well, what's considered equal, or what somebody may say is equal, may not be for the, one person, to another. And that's why taking an equity lens, even if we're looking at sliding scales, right? So we can't put everyone in one category and say, okay, we've decreased the pricing for the cost of living, or a housing unit, or a rental property. So now this should be equitable to everyone, because it's not going to be. And it goes back to what I said about education. We have to get rid of that one size fit all system. And I believe that is true as well when we start looking at healthcare, when we start looking at access to medications, going back to insulin. If we say that we drop the price to $10, and I'm just making this up very hypothetically, for access, for insulin. Well, maybe to you that's, something that you can afford. But to me, if I'm struggling just to stay employed, then that's not something that I can afford. So therefore, I will not have access to it. So again, I think that things that are heavily connected to our right to exist and survive, we really need to zoom in closer and look at how we have been doing things, and to make sure that we are ensuring equity so that everyone has the access to those things. And I do feel that education is a part of that, because if we do not ensure an equitable, high quality education for all, and not just some, not just those that are private school, then it becomes a negative snowball effect, right? Then you're going to have a hard time getting employment. If we have the ability to get some of our students licensed to be a CNA before they even graduate high school, right? So we're putting them in a position where they can come out of high school making money, compared to a school that does not have such programs. And so we have a student who is coming out struggling to get employment, or they're making minimum wage, somewhere else. So again, are we ensuring that all of our schools, have those, excuse me, honey, I need you to move. Are we ensuring that all of our schools have those trade programs so that our students can all have the same opportunity, or is it only our highly funded schools? And the same thing again is true with medications and access to healthcare.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with pretty much all that. I think, and again, I've not probably done as much research on the healthcare sort of, I don't want to call it an issue, but hot button topic as maybe some other things, but it's definitely, it is one that we need to address. I'll say that.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I met it. Like I said, I met a veteran who had to go back to, it might have been on my way up to your area, but I met a veteran in Fredericksburg, and I was telling him about my campaign, and he said, so what is your stance on healthcare, right? And he said, better yet, what is your stance on veterans, right? And that's something that we need to talk about as well, which I know that wasn't a question, but we have veterans who have served their time, and this particular young man told me he had to go all the way to Puerto Rico to get a medical procedure done because the VA refused to cover it. But that's not just exclusive to this young man. I hear countless. As I was up in Blacksburg, there was a young lady at the front desk of a hotel, and she saw my mask, and of course, so she stopped me, and we talked, and with tears in her eyes, she went on to say how her husband was a veteran. But our state, our government refuses to provide them with healthcare services, even though they put their life on the line. They've served their time. So again, where's that humanity at? Where's the equity at? And this, unfortunately, is a huge variable that, to me, just kind of breaks us and causes divides, amongst us. And we need to definitely, move towards an equity lens across the board, not just in healthcare, not just in education, but across the board. Even when we talk about housing, ability to obtain housing, there's still a lack of equity and discrimination in just the mortgage process. So we have a lot of work that needs to be done, and again, we need to continue to uplift and move forward progressive legislators and candidates that are going to say less and do more, and that are going to come on in and be ready to, fight to push, for equity and humanity and get the job done. Because what we oftentimes see, as a young, older Black man said to me when I was canvassing for another candidate, he said, ma'am, he said, during election time, legislators, they come out and they tell us what we want to hear so that they can get our vote. He said, but they never follow up and they never follow through. And time after time after time, our legislators show us that that's the truth. And they may go in it with good intentions initially, but oftentimes we see that, big corporations become the mouthpiece of candidates and of political parties. And what started off as a good intention, results into that candidate, or that legislator falling right on in line and, basically supporting the status quo. And we deserve better than that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. So this leads me to a question that I had planned on asking later, but I'll ask it now because you brought it up. What is to stop you from becoming that candidate that goes in with good intentions but gets sucked up by the system or some sort of corporation or something like that? Have you made a pledge to not accept donations from
Absolutely.
certain companies and other things like that? Or kind of what,
Absolutely.
like if you're talking to somebody and they ask you this question, well, obviously I just did, but what's your answer to that?
Absolutely. Well, for one, yes, my campaign, the Liberation Party, we will not accept donations from big corporations, because again, what happens is, they end up becoming a major mouthpiece, in policy decisions. And when you say what's to stop me from, from falling into that same rut, is that I am running out of necessity. Not because this is just something that I always wanted to do, but I am running out of necessity due to the continuous failures of the two-party system. I am running to be one of the many voices, hopefully, that will continue to elevate the voices, needs, and concerns of the voices of the unheard, of the oppressed people, of the working class. And I want the community members, our constituents across the Commonwealth, to hold me accountable, hold me to what I say that I'm going to do. And the great thing is, and when you say, well, what stops you from doing that, is that I don't have Dominion behind me. And I'm using Dominion as an example. Dominion isn't giving me money, and so they don't have any leverage over me. The only people who can hold me accountable is the people, not big corporations, or not the two-party system. And a lot of times, again, we're getting ready to see this. I'm glad we're talking about this, because we're getting ready to see it. So if I have a crystal ball, and if my crystal ball is correct, out of the Democratic primary will come Terry McCullough, right? When you look at some of the other candidates, such as Jennifer Carroll Foy and Jennifer McCullough, they've been pushing very hard, we need a Black governor. We need a Black woman, right? You never heard me say that. I know I'm Black, but I need somebody I need more than just somebody's pigmentation. I need their substance, right? And so you won't hear me, boasting, that we need a Black, governor. However, remember, or go back and listen to them saying that, because after the primaries, if Terry McCullough comes up, watch how they fall in line and support him. If I will be the only Black woman that will be on that ballot, let's see if they still say we must have a Black woman, as governor. They're going to fall in line and they're going to support the party, even though they bashed him so hard. So again, I don't have a big party, that I am pressured to do that. We rose up an independent party, a liberation party, that is committed to putting the needs, voices, and concerns of the people over profit in politics. I don't have big corporations, that just donated millions of dollars to me. We're we don't have much at all, but we do have the support of the people, and we do have very committed volunteers that continue to go around the Commonwealth with me, listen to the voices, needs, and concerns of the people, and we're dedicated to making sure that as we move legislation forward, that we elevate those needs and concerns.
So let's say a small business comes knocking. Do you have you talked with your like campaign people, like, hey, we're not going to accept a donation from a company over blank size revenue or employees, or kind
You
of,
froze for just a second.
how about now?
I can hear you.
Okay, so let's say like a small business comes knocking and says, hey, Princess, we like what you're doing. We want to donate to your campaign. Do you have a size cutoff that you've talked about with your campaign people, or kind of, because I think most small businesses, I would say, would not fall under the umbrella of what most progressives or people on the left would deem corporations. Like some mom and pop shop wants to give you $150 or whatever, like, or $1,000. I would assume that you wouldn't say no to that. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement, that unless it was one that we, they have a foundation and they have, a history of, representation of things that we are definitely not for, then we have no problem with rejecting. We haven't had that problem yet, but we have had, some small business owners, put forth donations, for us, and they're small, as you just stated, so that hasn't been a problem. But it is important to look at, where your money comes from. And oftentimes, when we look at different organizations, and I had talked to someone during an interview yesterday, and they had asked me a question. The question was on the line of, how do you feel, or what do you see as far as the relationship between grassroots organizers and politicians? And that was, I never had anyone ask me that question, and I was grateful for it, because oftentimes what we see even on the ground is, again, sometimes we have organizations that may have started and they have great intentions, but once kind of politicians get to them, or some of these big corporations, it kind of deflates what their initial intentions were for. So maybe that grassroots organization was fighting for housing rights, right? To ensure, housing for all. But once some of our politicians or big corporations start to support them and fund them, now they control their mouth. They control how far they can fight. I dealt with that firsthand, after my brother was murdered, early on, we had all hands on deck, and it's like, yeah, that police officer needs to be held accountable. After we did our first march, I remember saying, wait a minute. Yes, that police officer needs to be held accountable, but we need to go further. Who's giving police officers the green light to do this? We need to hold our elected officials accountable. And some of those same organizations, and community members backed away. They were like, whoa, Princess, you're going too far. You're saying hold the elected officials accountable now? You mean like that same mayor who's supporting my, helping and funded my organization? No, we can't do that, right? So, oftentimes when you have, funding and support, from some individuals, that can be very, very dangerous. And we're committed to not be sold out, by any other politicians, by any other organizations. We're not going to do that. We know why we started. We know, what our mission is, what our purpose is, and we're going to always stay true to that. And we want our constituents to hold us accountable. We want our constituents, to hold us to the fire, to doing exactly what we say that we're for, which is ensuring liberation is a human right, not a privilege. And you'll probably hear me say, they and we, because it's not about me. I am a vessel for the people. I am just one of so many, who are pushing my campaign and pushing the Liberation Party forward.
Yeah, I think that's almost how it was intended to be back when the Constitution was made. It was you are a vessel for the people to kind of, what do the people want, and then that's what you're there to represent them. So it's refreshing to hear you say that as well. I think you mentioned something a little while ago about minimum wage. So I kind of want to move on to sort of the more economic issues, and I was Googling right to work, because I've heard Virginia is a right to work state all gazillions of times, and I finally got around to figuring out sort of what it meant. And one of the things that sort of struck me or stood out to me a little bit was, you and I talked before about police unions and sort of the power that they hold. And yet when I read right to work and sort of it takes power away from the unions, and also you mentioned sort of you want to repeal the dangerous aspects of right to work. So I kind of just wanted to get some clarification on what that last part meant, the dangerous aspects of right to work, but also sort of that balance of, okay, maybe this police union has too much power, but we also want to make sure that workers sort of have more of we want to give unions sort of a prop up, but not necessarily the police one. So that's kind of like three
Absolutely.
questions in one,
It's
but yeah.
okay. And so let me know if I missed something. So as I said to you earlier, I am a teacher, and we collective bargaining is something that we have been fighting for. I remember when I went into my job, when I first started my job in 2018 at this new, where I'm currently at, and I wanted to negotiate my contract, and they were like, no, we just don't do that, right? And so, I didn't feel that I was being, compensated for my years of experience and for my level of education. And so it's kind of, when we look at, right to work, it's kind of like we don't have the ability to negotiate our contract and to fight for some of the benefits that we may feel that we collectively deserve. And so it's important that employers are empowered to be able to do that, right? And it's not kind of like you take it or you leave it, or you don't have a job. And it's kind of like I hear you kind of saying, okay, but you're saying support unions but not police unions, right? Well, I am saying that, right? And this is the reason why. This is the reason why, for a couple of reasons. I remember, and I'm not sure if I told you this, but I know we talked for great length, but I remember the day of special session, the first day of special session during the uprising this past summer. My uncle Jeff and I had Delegate Hudson from Charlottesville had requested to meet with me and my uncle right before special session began. And one of the questions that my uncle asked her was, are a lot of elected officials, state elected officials, are their campaigns funded by police unions? I don't know where that question came from. He just asked her. And she kind of dropped her head and she said, yeah, and we need to take a moment to process that. Because like when we look at, okay, well, in Virginia, the Democratic Party is the majority in House, Senate, and we have a Democratic governor. So they have the numbers to pass the bill to end qualified immunity. They have the numbers to mandate independent civilian review boards with subpoena power, but why aren't they? Again, as I said earlier, we have to trace the money. We have to trace the money. So again, what happens, in my opinion, is that these police unions become a big mouthpiece as well, as far as how far our politicians will go. Twice in 6 months, the bill to end qualified immunity was heard. Guess what happened? Twice in 6 months, that bill was killed. And so we see that the police unions, have a major pull in our political system. And not only that, is when we look at how the police unions are being used, they are a major force again in protecting police officers, even when they act out of their ethical realm, when they unjustly use force to apprehend a person, whether it's police brutalization or it's murder. Again, they are serving as a oppressor there to the people. Instead of just empowering and protecting the rights of police officers, they have a whole nother monster, a layer to them that you will not hear politicians talk about. And again, I don't mean to put Delegate Hudson out there, but she told us that, and again, that's something that's really, really important, because when we elect our various elected officials on the local to state level, we elect them to represent the needs of the people, right? But that's not happening when you have Dominion, that's being their mouthpiece, and that's not happening when their mouthpieces are where their money is coming from, which includes police unions. And so, yeah, we're definitely for defunding the police in general. And you didn't ask, but I'm going to say it. Again, we are for defunding the police and reallocating funds to systems of community care. What we're saying is that we cannot put everything from A to Z on our police officers. plate and expect them to do it and do it right. They are not trained to deal with mental health. They should not be dealing with mental health calls. They are not trained to deal with a person who just had a drug overdose. They should not be dealing with that. They are not trained to handle a 3-year-old in a school who just had a mental health crisis and is seeing things or people, but that's who we are told that we are required to call. So instead of giving them money to do what they can't do, reallocate that money to systems of care. And it's not done. So when they commit these offenses, when they commit these murders or acts of police brutalization, they feel empowered to continue to do it because between the police union and the elected officials that are supported by the police unions, they're backed. They're backed and they're covered and they feel empowered. And so we must, in my opinion, first step is defund the police. And our next step is we have to abolish the police. Abolish the police and raise up a brand new system that is ensuring equity and humanity is what is built upon, because our police departments are systemically racist. If you look at from their origins, they're systemically racist. And until we, you can hire as many police officers, new police officers as you want. But as long as our legislation still empowers them to do the same things that they have been historically doing for a long period of time, they're going to continue to do it. There's no amount of money that we can keep throwing to them. We hear them say, give police more training, invest in the police more, give them crisis intervention training. The police officer who murdered my brother was crisis intervention trained. He did not use any of the training that he received. There was no accountability for him using it. And what do? We continue to throw money towards the police officers and say, just train them more. No accountability, but just keep giving them training because it looks good, it sounds good. Again, these unions are backing our politicians. Therefore, they're financially backing our politicians, and they are becoming the mouthpieces of our politicians.
So I have a couple things. I'm going to go kind of one by one. And I
will tell you, I only have a couple more minutes because I do have to get to my little one, but I'll take another question or two.
Okay, so I will. All right, so I'll go with one real quick, and then I'll go to the wrap up.
Okay.
The first one is that in terms of unions, what is, and your support of other unions, what is to stop them from becoming the beast that the police unions currently are today? So it wasn't really so much like, I forgot how you phrase it, but anyways, what is to stop those unions from sort of becoming the beast that the police union is today at this point?
So there's like a national call, to address this, basically putting a cap, on how much, how much donations or how much funds, can go to a politician or their campaign. And so right now, we look at some of it's all public information. So you can pull up mine and it's laughable to me, because not much funds at all. But if you go on, to the reporting system, you're able to trace back funding, to each of our politicians, to each of their campaigns. So there's a national move to, put caps, put limits on the amount that can be donated to a campaign, because what ends up happening, and very frequently, is the campaign that makes the most money, that can rack in the most money, is oftentimes the campaign that moves forward. So it's not necessarily that that's the best candidate. That's the candidate that has the money, enough money to have the TV ads, that's the candidate that has enough money to put billboards all around. So we have to be equitable with even the funding, because that would help to cut down on these, whether it be the police union or whether it be big corporations like Dominion or Appalachian Power, that end up becoming the mouthpiece of so many of our candidates, our legislators, and that has a direct impact on legislation that is passed or not passed.
I agree. I think that's good. I think a cap on that sort of thing is good. This would kind of hopefully make the substance of that candidate show through rather than the amount of money they got. The other thing is sort of, I've heard people say, as far as the police training, they need more training. It's from, I think, somebody that was in, you know who Jocko Willink is?
Say the name one more time.
Jocko Willink. He was a Navy SEAL. He made the argument on a podcast that I listened to a little while ago that the that if they were training more, the police were training more often in terms of like the crisis and intervention training, instead of doing it like once a year or however often they do it now, if they were training like once a month or once a week or something like that, then maybe the situation would be different. Do you have any sort of thoughts on that, or not really?
I do. And I totally disagree. Because, I'm going to go back to the analogy that I used earlier, as a doctor, as a nurse, if you're trained in CPR and, you see someone, a patient right in front of you, turning blue, and you just stand there, and you know how to perform CPR, you have the ability to help that individual, but you just stand there and you just watch, and you refuse to use any of your training. I want you to tell me what is going to happen to that doctor that sits there or stands there and watches and does not render aid, does not use CPR to help. What do you think is going to happen to that doctor?
Fired or some sort of other disciplinary action.
They're out of here, okay?
Yeah.
And that family's got a big lawsuit against them. No question about it. But with police officers, and I'm going to use my brother as an example, Officer Michael Nyataki was crisis intervention trained, but he did not use any of the training that he received, okay? So my point is that training without accountability is useless, okay? That doctor being trained in CPR, refusing to use it and not being held accountable, it makes that training useless because he or she did not use the tools that they were trained to use. So I know I don't agree that more training is the answer. Accountability training coupled with strong accountability is the answer. If officers know that you can't go putting your knee on someone's neck without worrying about having charges against you, and there being strong accountability, then you're not going to go walk around putting your knee on anyone's neck. In Richmond, there was a police officer who threatened I believe they were middle school or high school students and said, wait until your ASS turns 18, you're mine, okay? There was no accountability. The officer said he was going to apologize publicly. He didn't, and it was left, So again, they're able to do, because all they have to say, oh, I feared for my life. I saw this little Black boy and I feared for my life. It's not okay. So if the officers are not being held accountable, that's why even post the uprise after the murder of George Floyd, up until the day that George Floyd's trial was going on and the verdict came out, someone was murdered by a police officer that very day while the trial was going on. But again, we can't keep putting Band-Aids on things. That's what our legislators like doing. They love putting Band-Aids on things, right? But we have to start killing the snake at its head. We must start getting to the root of the problem. If officers knew that, if you pull out that gun and you shoot someone, okay, without using every tool that you possibly had, you're going to be held accountable. I guarantee you they're going to think twice before they pull out that gun. But if it's so easy to just say, qualified immunity, oh, I feared for my life, right? Because he went and I thought he was grabbing a gun. There's a person in, I think the young man is in Spotsylvania about a month ago. I think it's Isaiah Brown. I hope I'm not saying the wrong name.
I think it was as well.
Yes, he was shot multiple times by a police officer who had just dropped him off at home, okay? For whatever reason, he was called back. They said that Isaiah, was having a confrontation with his brother. The police officer shot him several times, to include in his face. Tell me where is the humanity there? Tell me where the threat is that you need to shoot a person in their face. Where is the line between trying to control the situation and being able to, prevent that person from being a threat anymore, okay? And mobilizing that person, shooting them in the leg, or something. Better yet, how about we go ahead and use a baton, hand-to-hand combat. So we train the police officers in all of these things, how to use a taser. We equip them with them, and they're not cheap. We equip them with a baton. We equip them with hand-to-hand combat training, but they don't have to use any of that. When it's out there, when they're out there, a job that they signed up for, okay, we allowed them to just say they were scared. As a school administrator, I have been threatened as a teacher, but more so as a school administrator, because I have to hand down discipline as an assistant principal. I've been threatened. My life has been threatened multiple times. I've been hit, but not one time have I tried to cause harm to anyone. My only tool that I have is my word. So I need to try to de-escalate things with my mouth, because if I even begin to put my hands on a student or a parent, best believe I'm not only going to lose my job, I will be charged. So why is it again that police officers who know the risk that they are signing up for, all they have to do is say that they were scared? Countless Black and brown people are gone today because a police officer said that they thought that their phone charger was a gun. We had a police officer, female, who shot someone and said she thought she pulled her taser. Really? Is the training that bad? There's a weight difference. There's complete difference, even in the physical characteristics and how a gun versus a taser feel. But again, we give them every benefit of the doubt. And my thing is this: when you have the ability, when you have the power to take someone's life, we must ensure that there's accountability in place. And there's not. This is a very protected department. This is a very protected system. We are functioning in a very systemically racist society that many people don't want to acknowledge, because it's so much easier not to acknowledge it. It's too big of a monster for people to attack. But if not now, then when? If not us, then who? We can't talk about equity and inclusion and not make sure that our legislation is showing that. If it doesn't start at our legislation, then everything else is going to, from getting access to mortgages, to the quality of education in all of our schools, to access to healthcare, you name it. And so I hold our elected officials at a very, very high level of accountability. And it infuriates me when they advertise themselves as candidates and call themselves progressives when all they're doing is a very large performance and they're giving us crumbs. They're always taking the path of least resistance. And by them doing so, people are losing their lives. By them doing so, people do not have the access to this quote unquote American dream, okay? Because of a lack of equity across the board in so many different areas. And so I believe that we must demand more. We must continue to enlighten, empower, and mobilize our community members so that they can continue to challenge the status quo and that they can continue to rise up and claim some of these key seats.
Gotcha. You got time for one more smaller one, and then we'll get you out of here.
You got
so it. This is a little
only
bit less.
For you, Eric.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. This one's a little bit less. It's not really policy related, but for you personally, how is your life different now that you're kind of in the public eye a little bit? It's like you can just Google your name and, oh, Princess Blanding said this 6 months ago, and like all that stuff is just out there now. How is it different for you?
I live my life. I feel like I live it the same. Well, it's been the same for the past 3 years. I've been fighting. Like I don't, I don't really. Notoriety doesn't mean anything, to me at all. I shop at a secondhand store. That's where I get most of my clothes from. Notoriety doesn't mean anything to me. I feel called to do what I'm doing. It definitely, if you would have asked me, even in 2018, my brother was murdered. I remember people saying, you need to run for mayor. And I literally was like, yeah, right. Like, I hate politics, but I had to force myself to get out of that mindset because otherwise I was running in place. Otherwise, I was just complaining against my peers. It's kind of like when you're at work and everybody's griping and complaining about something, but nobody wants to go up and address and confront the manager, right? Or your boss, and nobody wants to take on that position and do a better job, So, I feel that I've been called. It's not easy. It's not easy. I can't afford, to stop working as some other candidates have done. I don't make a 6-figure salary. So I literally go from teaching all day, and my babies don't even know I'm running because I believe in giving them my all. If they find out, it's not going to be from me, because when they see me, I want them to see my teacher, Miss Blandon, and know that I'm there to make sure that I'm giving them my all. So I transitioned from doing that to walking out the door and I'm interviewing, on the drive home, also making sure that, my middle school daughter is okay and she's on top of her grades, and, checking on my middle daughter and getting ready to help my oldest daughter move into a house. And so my life is like this, sometimes I don't feel like I have much time to breathe. However, I do believe, as I said earlier, that anything worth having is worth fighting very hard for. And I believe in every single thing that we are doing. I am surrounded by a major support system within my family because I couldn't do what I'm doing if I did not have them. And I'm also surrounded by my second level of family, which is my campaign and other community members, because again, we are all volunteers. I can't afford to pay my core team, maybe a volunteer here and there, but our team works 7 days a week around the clock. It is not uncommon for us to have a meeting or to be in communication 2 o'clock in the morning, and nobody complains because we all believe in what we're doing, and we all were forced to see very directly and very firsthand during the uprise last summer. That was a turning point for all of us. We were able to see how our legislators are continuously failing us, how they are riding on and they continue to grow and stay in their positions based off of tradition and based off of fear, riding off of fear of people. And we're not okay with it anymore. We've seen a lot, during the uprise. We've seen, people, young, old, white, Black, Latinx, all on the front line in unity and being attacked by the police, and not one elected official took a stance for us. And why were we being attacked? Because we were fighting for our right to exist. So how can we be okay with that? How can we be okay with just accepting the status quo? And so, again, name recognition, that means nothing to me at all. What would mean the most to me is being able to be a major change agent and to move the Commonwealth, to a very liberated and inclusive Commonwealth where we all have the right to exist, where we all have the right to grow, and to thrive. That's what means a lot to me.
Well, sounds good. I see your little one right there. Let's get you out of here.
She's with me, yes.
I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we'll see you up there at some point. But
let's claim it.
Yeah, wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Take care.